Have you ever noticed that the more you talk about money, the more it seems like something starts to freeze up, even when everything indicates that you're doing well? Perhaps it makes sense at first. When you're still building wealth, talking about goals, achievements, and plans seems to open doors, generate connections, and attract opportunities. Sharing results gives a sense of progress, belonging, and validation. And, for a while, it really works. People listen, praise, and ask for advice. You feel like you're on the right track. Have you ever experienced this? But there's a specific point in this journey, a point that many people don't realize when they cross it, where this same behavior begins to produce the opposite effect. It's as if, without warning, the game changes rules. The noise that previously helped starts to hinder. The exposure that once seemed harmless begins to weigh heavily. And, curiously, this usually happens when net worth approaches, or surpasses, that symbolic mark of $250K. On social media, for example, it's common to see people celebrating every financial achievement, every new investment, every decision made. In conversations, the topic of money comes up frequently, sometimes as a source of pride, sometimes as a way to vent. Unsolicited advice emerges, silent comparisons are made, and others' expectations are imposed. The desire to prove that it worked grows almost imperceptibly. And all of this seems normal, until it isn't anymore. What few people mention is that, at this level, wealth building ceases to be merely a matter of numbers and becomes primarily a psychological issue. How you speak, with whom you speak, and how much you speak begins to directly influence your financial decisions. Investors who are still before this stage tend to believe that total transparency is a virtue. Those who advance a little further begin to realize that information is also exposure, and exposure comes at a price. Perhaps you're feeling this right now. A strange pressure to maintain an image, a discomfort in realizing that certain people have changed the way they talk to you, or even that silent feeling that oversharing is draining your focus, energy, and clarity. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you, and perhaps explain why some decisions become more difficult precisely when you start gaining more financial maturity. There's an initial shock that almost every investor faces when approaching this level, a clash between the behavior that helped them get here and the behavior needed to keep moving forward. It's at this point that many freeze, not for lack of technical knowledge, but because they fail to realize that the environment has changed, the rules have changed, and the game has become quieter. And it is precisely from this moment that a different, almost invisible pattern begins to emerge, observed by those who have already crossed the shark gate. A pattern that doesn't involve talking more, showing more, or proving more, but something quite different. Something we will begin to explore now, in the next part. And if, at any point while you were listening to this, something inside you felt a slight pang, perhaps it's because this story also resonates with you. If this topic makes sense to you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. It could be a situation you've experienced, a question that arose, or even that hard-to-explain feeling when you realize that the money didn't bring the relief they promised. This space isn't just mine, it's ours. And many people read the comments trying to understand if they're not alone in this phase. If you feel this conversation deserves to continue, liking the video helps more than it seems. It's a simple signal, but it tells the platform that this type of content needs to reach more people who are going through exactly the same point in their financial journey, often silently. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach those who still think the problem is a lack of money, when in fact the challenge is something else. And if you want to continue exploring these layers of wealth building that almost no one talks about, subscribing to the channel is a way to walk alongside us. It's not about easy promises or miraculous shortcuts, but about understanding the game as it really is, especially after 250K, when the rules change without warning. All of this that we're discussing here is part of something bigger, a pattern that begins to reveal itself when external noise no longer helps. And it's precisely at this point that certain attitudes start to make all the difference, something we need to look at more carefully from now on, in the next section. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is where a turning point occurs that almost no one notices while they're living it. Up to a certain point in the financial journey, talking seems natural. You share ideas, plans, movements. You comment on investments, strategies, next steps. There's even a sense of control in it, as if putting everything out there helps organize your mind. But when your assets grow, this dynamic changes silently, and those who don't notice pay a price that doesn't show up in the numbers. More experienced investors are beginning to understand something uncomfortable, yet liberating. Information is power, and exposed power loses value when you talk too much. You're not just telling a story, you're revealing intentions, disclosing the timing of your decisions, showing where your convictions lie, and often your doubts. Without realizing it, you're handing over pieces of your game to an environment that isn't always neutral. And at this stage, the risk ceases to be just the market. It starts to reside in the people around you. There's a hidden truth here that's almost never stated directly. The further you advance, the less emotionally protected you become when everything is exposed. Seemingly innocent comments begin to influence decisions. External opinions create noise. Silent comparisons generate pressure. You start adjusting moves not based on what makes strategic sense, but on the impact they might have on others' perceptions. And this erodes clarity, little by little. This is a profound mindset shift. It's not about shutting yourself off from the world or acting arrogantly. It's about financial maturity. The silence that emerges after a certain level isn't shyness or insecurity. It's strategy. It's understanding that not every idea needs to be verbalized, not every plan needs to be validated, not every decision needs an audience. Silence becomes a tool for protecting one's own journey. Behind the scenes, more discerning investors observe more than they speak. They listen before reacting. They process internally before sharing. Not because they know less, but because they have learned that talking too much weakens their position. It reveals weaknesses that are still being worked on. It exposes movements that have not yet matured. It creates an unnecessary impact on decisions that require calm, time, and emotional distance. And perhaps you've already experienced this firsthand. That feeling of regret after saying something too soon. That doubt planted by someone who doesn't live in the same context as you. That strange need to justify choices that, deep down, didn't need explaining. All of this is not a coincidence. It's part of the psychological transformation that happens when the game stops being noisy and becomes silent. At this point, silence becomes a filter. It separates what is essential from what is noise. It protects fragile decisions that are still forming. It preserves mental energy. And above all, it returns control to where it should always be. Inside, not outside. It's an attitude that changes how you move, think, and react, and that redefines the relationship between you, money, and the environment around you. This shift doesn't happen all at once. It builds gradually as you perceive the real impact of words, exposure, and external expectations. And when that starts to become clear, other layers of this silent behavior also begin to reveal themselves in an even deeper way. If this resonated with you on any level, comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is where the contrast becomes evident, and a certain quiet fascination begins to emerge. When you closely observe those who have already crossed this level of the journey, you realize that their behavior changes in an almost counterintuitive way. While many people still believe that visibility generates power, these investors are moving in the opposite direction. Less stage presence, less discourse, less need to constantly position themselves. Not for lack of opinion, but because they understand the impact that each word carries. In this world after 250K, the psychological pattern is different. Instead of quick statements, long questions arise. Instead of ready-made conclusions, attentive listening appears. They observe the environment, analyze people, mentally test scenarios before any decision. There is a strategic calm there, a mindset trained to see beyond the obvious. There is no rush to convince, because there is no need to prove anything. Authority comes from internal control, not external validation. Behind the scenes, these people rarely speak in public, but they think a great deal in silence. They know that every unnecessary exposure creates noise, distorts perceptions, and often attracts expectations that add no value. Therefore, important decisions are rarely made amidst applause. They happen away from superficial conversations, outside the social radar, in a space where clarity is not tainted by the opinions of others. This detachment is not isolation, it is a refined strategy. The curious thing is that this behavior is not usually taught in basic finance textbooks. There, the focus is on numbers, methods, products and charts. But almost no one talks about posture, about presence, about how to navigate environments where money is no longer the main challenge. This is a hidden truth of the journey. There comes a point when the greatest competitive advantage lies not in technical knowledge, but in the ability to observe without reacting, to decide without announcing, to move forward without making a sound. There's also an important emotional aspect here. The less you talk, the less you compromise with external expectations. Less pressure to maintain a narrative. Less need to explain choices that only make sense within your context. This preserves mental energy, strengthens inner confidence, and reduces the impact of interference that could derail your path. It's a subtle but profound transformation that redefines the relationship between identity, money, and decisions. Those who have already understood the game don't seek the spotlight. They seek a silent advantage. They don't rush to show results because they know that true gain lies in continuity, not in spectacle. This attitude creates a different kind of status. Not the visible status, but the one perceived in the form of security, consistency, and emotional mastery. A status that doesn't need to be announced to be felt. And when you start to see these patterns, something changes in the way you observe your own behavior. Certain attitudes begin to seem excessive. Certain words, unnecessary. Certain statements, risky. It's as if a new filter forms, separating what is noise from what is truly strategic. And, little by little, other layers of this silent world begin to reveal themselves, showing that the game beyond this level requires more perception than visible action. If this way of looking at things made sense to you, comment below. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because there's a cost that almost no one calculates when they decide to overexpose themselves. And it doesn't appear in bank statements, graphs, or reports. It appears in the mind. It appears in the emotions. It appears in the way you start making decisions that, from the outside, seem rational, but inside are full of noise. When you talk too much about money, about plans, about results, something invisible begins to form around you. Expectations that aren't yours. At first it seems harmless, curious comments, frequent questions, subtle comparisons, but over time, these external voices begin to weigh on you. You start to feel the need to maintain an image, that backing down is a sign of weakness, that changing your mind sounds like a public mistake. And without realizing it, your journey ceases to be guided solely by strategy and becomes influenced by ego, anxiety, and identity. This is where the real impact of exposure begins to take its toll. Many investors end up altering important decisions simply to avoid disappointing those watching. They adjust strategies to appear consistent. They hold on to bad positions for too long because they've already talked too much about them. They make hasty investments not because the scenario is favorable, but because they need to prove a point, to prove they were right, to prove they know what they're doing, to prove they deserve to be where they are. This is a hidden truth that is rarely admitted, but which silently erodes results. The problem is that the market doesn't reward consistency of discourse. It rewards clarity of decision, and clarity requires mental space. When your mind is occupied with what others will think, with the social impact of each move, with the narrative you need to uphold, there's less energy left to analyze risks, accept mistakes, and make adjustments at the right time. The difficulty in retreating at this stage isn't technical, it's emotional. There's also the constant comparison. Even when no one says anything directly, you feel it. You feel the weight of being watched. You feel the need to always be moving forward, even when the best move would be to stop, wait, or reduce exposure. This silent pressure generates anxiety, accelerates decisions, and creates an unstable internal environment. And decisions made under stress are rarely the best, especially when the game already demands maturity. This is the invisible cost of exposure. It transforms money into an identity test. Each result begins to say something about who you are, not just what you did. And when money becomes intertwined with identity, the fear of loss increases, self-criticism intensifies, and objectivity diminishes. The journey, which should be strategic, becomes emotional. And this is dangerous precisely when the numbers get bigger. Those who understand this in time begin to protect more than they expose, not out of paranoia, but out of self-awareness. They realize that silence is also psychological protection, that less external noise means more internal stability. and that preserving one's own mind is as important as preserving capital. When this realization begins to sink in, something changes in the way you approach decisions, mistakes, and even victories, opening space for a different attitude towards the game. If this resonated with something you've ever felt or experienced, comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is where the silent rule truly begins to make sense. It's not about hiding from the world, nor about living in absolute secrecy. It's about focus. It's about understanding that at a certain point in the journey, revealing less isn't fear, it's maturity. The silence that emerges after 250K doesn't push away opportunities. It filters them. It returns control to those who decide calmly, away from the noise that steals clarity. Observe how this transformation happens from within. When you reduce your exposure, something curious emerges. Your mind becomes lighter. Decisions are given time to mature. Anxiety decreases because there is no longer an invisible audience demanding consistency, performance, or immediate results. You begin to realize that not every victory needs to be shared, and that not every doubt needs to be resolved in public. This conscious control of exposure protects energy, and energy at this level is as valuable as capital. After reaching 250K, the game shifts. Before, the question was, how to earn more? Now it becomes, how not to lose what really matters. Not losing focus, not losing direction, not losing your own mindset. The impact of external noise becomes evident when you compare moments of decision-making in silence with those made under social pressure. One progresses with consistency, the other exacts a high emotional price, and that price rarely pays off. Behind the scenes, those who understand this rule live more stably, not because they always get it right, but because they make mistakes with less stress. Silence becomes an ally in recognizing limits, adjusting course, and accepting strategic retreats without drama. There's no need to maintain narratives. There's freedom to change, and this freedom creates a kind of peace that doesn't appear in spreadsheets, but sustains better decisions over time. This attitude also redefines belonging. You begin to feel part of an invisible group that values observation, patience, and self-control. It's not elitism, it's a shared mindset. People who understand that speaking less enhances listening, that observing more reveals patterns, that advancing peacefully is more sustainable than rushing through the crowd. This is a hidden truth of the Shark Gate. Real progress is often silent. When that penny drops, the journey changes pace. Less urgency, more intention. Less exposure, more direction. You start choosing more carefully where you place your attention, time, and words. And little by little, you realize that this unwritten rule isn't the only one. There are other layers, other revelations, other subtle adjustments that present themselves as silence creates space to better see the game as it truly is. If this idea resonated with you, comment below. Moving forward in silence. If you've made it this far, it probably wasn't by chance. This kind of conversation only makes sense to those who have already realized that the game changes when the noise decreases. So, if you want to continue exploring this quieter and more strategic side of wealth building, subscribing to the channel is the easiest way to stay connected. The idea here is exactly that, to share what almost no one talks about, but many people experience. If something in this video resonated with you, leave a comment saying, "This message was for me." I really do read them, and it helps me understand who's on the other side of this journey, going through similar phases. And if that connection made sense, a like is almost like a silent handshake, a way of showing that this conversation was worthwhile. And before you leave, take a look at the video over there. It directly complements everything we've just talked about and delves even deeper into this world that only begins to appear after a certain level. Click there and continue with me.